Hello, everybody. This is Fernando for the latest Ghosts and Spirits podcast. All right, let's go ahead and we'll talk about the next entry here. This one has been suggested in the past several times, and I thought I was talk about it this time around because I was finally able to look at the wealth of information that's tied to this particular entity and then try to share some of it, at least the most juiciest parts, to you here. This is apparently a pretty well known whatever it is, ghost spirit entity that's located there in Ireland. So much so that it's been visited multiple times by various TV paranormal investigators. It's been featured on the show Scariest Places on Earth. Most Haunted is another one as well. The Ghost Hunters, they're from Sci-Fi Channel. They've done it as well. And then most recently, back in 2014 for the Halloween special, Ghost Adventures, the crew there actually went to this location. And what it is it's a ghost, it's a spirit. I still don't know exactly what it quite is, but it's called the Elemental of Leap Castle. And it's apparently found at a location called Leap Castle there in Count Offaly, Ireland. So if you're ever in Ireland on a vacation and you happen to be near a town called Roscrea, then you are very close by, just about 4 miles away from this castle. You're taking a look at it here in this picture, and it apparently is a very much site for tourists. People still go there to this day. It is open to the public. How you schedule a tour, I have no idea, but no doubt if you're near that area and you ask any of the locals, they'll be happy to point you in the right direction. Now, a bit of warning when it comes to anybody trying to visit this place specifically for this thing, this elemental. Apparently, it is a pretty nasty thing. There are various encounters, which I'll talk about here, where this thing, whatever it is, absolutely scares and frights people to the point where it's almost harmful, the extent that this thing can do damage. So much so that, again, it's something that I say with caution. If you're going to go visit this building just to try to see if you can catch a glance, you may get more than you wished for. So what is this Elemental of Leap Castle? Well, if you follow the tales tied to the castle itself, apparently it is something, most likely it's a spirit of some sort, that has been with the castle almost as long as the castle has been in existence. And this is a very old castle. It's still debated as to when it was built, but people say it's somewhere either around the 13th century, maybe up to the 15th century. So we're talking about something that is hundreds of years old. And it is found in this castle to this day. Stories, tales tied to it, to encounters with this elemental, are still to this day. In fact, one of the stories I'll highlight here in a few minutes, it's very recent, so it's good to see another interesting note here. Finally, an encounter that is just a few years old that I can talk about. Now, as far as the actual description of what this elemental is, probably the best noted description comes from a woman named Mildred Darby. This was back in 1909. Mildred Darby was a part of a lineage of the Darby family who came into ownership of this castle for a long time. I think it was since like the mid 1600s or so. The Darbys inherited or owned this castle, and so give or take about 300 years or so, and cut to 1909, and that's when this Mildred Darby had her first encounter. And it's very notable because she provides one of the best known descriptions yet. Now, the reason why Mildred may have had her encounter was because apparently at that time she loved to do things involving the occult. I don't know if it involved like seances or anything as far as inviting things in with summonings of some sort. But whatever she did, she apparently awoke this thing, this elemental, and it quickly got her attention. In fact, this is what she wrote in detail as to what this thing is. I'm going to read it word for word so that way you have an exact idea of what she was referring to. She said, "Suddenly, two hands were laid on my shoulders. I turned around sharply and saw, as clearly as I see you now, a gray thing standing a couple of feet from me with its bent arms raised as if it were cursing me. I cannot describe in words how utterly awful the thing was, its very undefinable rendering the horrible shadow more gruesome. Human in shape, a little shorter than I am, I could just make out the shape of big black holes like great eyes, and then sharp features. But the whole figurehead, face, hands, and all was gray, unclean, bluish gray, something of the color and appearance of common cotton wool." And then she further describes more along its size. She said, that's where I think they started calling it elemental at that point. She said, "This thing was about the size of a sheep, thin, gaunt, and shadowy in parts. Its face was human, or to be more accurate, inhuman, in its vileness, with large holes of blackness for eyes, loose, slobbery lips, and a thick, saliva-dripping jaw, sloping back suddenly into its neck. Nose it had none, only spreading, cancerous cavities, the whole face being a uniform tint of gray. This, too, was the color of the dark coarse hair covering its head, neck, and body. Its forearms were thickly coated with the same hair. So were its paws, large, loose, and hand-shaped, and it sat on its hind legs. One hand or paw was raised, and a claw-like finger was extended ready to scratch the paint. Its lusterless eyes, which seemed half decomposed and looked incredibly foul, stared into mine, and the horrible smell, which had before offended my nostrils, only 100 times intensified, came up to my face, filling me with a deadly nausea. And then finally she says, "I noticed the lower half of the creature was indefinite and seemed semi-transparent. At least I could see the framework of the door that led into the gallery through its body." So by far a very, very accurate description of what this elemental is. So much so that someone else wrote a letter. I guess they saw Mildred's report somewhere, and they wrote a letter to her also describing what they saw. They said that when they visited the castle there, whatever this thing was, they saw it as well. And it was actually in the gallery above her at that point, looking down at them. I love that part because it instantly reminded me of that great teaser, that playable teaser from Silent Hills. Anyone who's played that game knows there's a very memorable part in it when you, as the main player, are walking past some kind of open space near the stairs. All of a sudden there's a crash of some sort. You look up, and then that's when you see this thing, whatever that ghost was within the playable teaser, staring back at you with like some kind of grin, some kind of evil looking grin of some sort, as it slowly just fades away and goes back. That's what it reminded me of here, because the same thing occurred. She said that when it was staring back at the gallery looking down at her, then the thing suddenly faded out of sight. It only became less and less visible until it outright vanished. Crazy, crazy stuff. And again, this thing, whatever it is, it definitely makes its presence known to anyone that's there. In fact, I was mentioning earlier that there was a more recent encounter. This happened in June of 18th, 2006, so not too far back, about a good 9 years or so. There was someone that went to the Elemental Castle, and this is what they said. They said, "I looked into the darkness of a corridor that exited the spiral stairway, and then I became aware of the smell of sulfur. It was as if boxes and boxes of matches had suddenly been lit at once. I looked at my friend who had taken me to visit Leap Castle. He could also smell the sulfur, and I stared into the darkness of the corridor and had the impression that a beast, like a bear or lion, was staring back at me. The tension was rising like a ticking time bomb. My friend then closed the door and said, 'Let sleeping dogs lie,' meaning sometimes you have to leave things alone." And then that's when they pretty much got the heck out of there. In fact, there was another encounter too, where somebody mentioned that they also stared into like the end of some kind of hallway because they felt as if something was there. Not quite there at that moment, but something was like around the corner. And then to their utter horror, like they saw like this mist of some sort. I don't know if it was like a grayish mist or a white mist of some sort, but it rounded the corner and it ran like straight to them, and it passed that person. And then when it passed them, that's when they felt like a sharp, I don't know if it was a pain, but it was definitely like coldish pain of some sort. And then that's when they too got the heck out of there. That's the main thing about this elemental that people describe. They see it, they feel it because of it staring at them. They smell it also because of the sulfur, and then in some cases with the last encounter, it actually tries to do something to them in terms of contact. Some people have even thought that this thing, this elemental of Leap Castle, has the ability to kind of change the atmosphere, and the way it does it is it changes it in a way where it creates like a heightened tension of some sort, so much so that people, especially those of, let's say, like a weak heart or debilitating health of some sort, they grow and they get into a position where they actually could be at a loss when it comes to their health, so severe because of the tension, the stress, whatever this thing is, and the heightened sense that it's causing to their body, that it puts them into like overdrive. And with their body already being so debilitated, then that could be a problem. So very bad thing. Again, if you go there, look out, because this is not something good. Now, as far as what it is exactly, like how this elemental came apart, there's no clear answer, only several vague answers, and I'll list some of them below. One of the theories with regards to how this elemental came to be is that it is actually part of Druidic magic, and the idea was that this was something that was summoned to that particular castle by the Celtic Druids, and the main reason was they wanted this thing to protect them, to protect the Druids from anyone else, probably like some outsider or some other tribe of some sort that was doing like a warlike fashions to try to take over the castle there. And they did this summoning by doing some kind of blood sacrifices. I believe it was described with human blood, and this, whatever this thing was, it came up, it empowered the spirit, and then that's how it was able to ward off any enemies of the castle while at the same time protecting the Druids there. And then just through history, it decided to stay long after the Druids were gone. Others have mentioned that another theory is that this elemental could actually become involved from sorcery, but not from those inside the castle, but rather outside the castle, like the actual quote-unquote enemies of the castle themselves. In a weird way, some of the enemies, including one guy by the name of Gerald Fitzgerald, quite a unique name now, Gerald Fitzgerald, who was called the Earl of Kildare. He was apparently a practitioner of also dark arts, and he was someone that had tried for a long time on different occasions to try to seize that castle. And one of the ways that he tried to do this, if the story is believed, is he was using this elemental as a weapon of some sort. He summoned it, and then he set it loose within the castle to try to destroy it from the inside out. And then just through history, this elemental decided to stay thereafter. One of the more fascinating theories is this elemental came from a very dark history of the castle. There was one of the owners there, the castle, was someone named Tad Coach O'Carroll, but he went by another name called One-Eyed Tad, and he was someone that was a pretty bad guy. I don't know how many enemies he had, but he certainly took care of a lot of those enemies. At one point, he incapacitated 40 members of a clan called the O'Mahan clan. He drugged them with food and wine, and then while they were in that debilitated state, he took them one by one to a place called an oubliette. I believe that's the word, oubliette. And think of it this way, it's a dungeon of some sort hidden by a trap door. But at the very bottom of that particular dungeon is a pit. And on that pit, it's either in some places hard rock or hard stone, or in other places there are conspicuous, purposely placed spikes to ensure that if anyone is thrown into that dungeon/pit, then they'll either hit the hard rock and stone and like break several bones and maybe even their neck, or if they hit another spot filled with these spikes, then they'll be impaled and probably either die instantly or die a suffering death. Either way, this guy, this O'Carroll, took all these people, the 40 of them, and while they were still living, threw them down one by one. And then you want the proof of this comes from the fact that after this horrific incident was done, it was sealed up. But then sometime in the mid 1920s, the actual dungeon was found, and then it was opened, and then that's when inside people found actually 150 different skeletal bones of people. So those 40 people that he drugged and then killed in the dungeon, he must have done it many more times because there was 150 people. And so the idea is that this elemental is tied to that oubliette, like it was created by the death of these particular victims, or it was created by the suffering of these victims as they I guess were basically living out the last days of their lives in complete horror and complete pain. Quite a horrible way to die, because if you fall on the bottom and you're impaled, let's say you're bleeding to death, then you'll bleed probably for a long time depending on the severity of the wound, and there's no way to escape. And then others that, let's say, landed and broke their neck, they're even in a worse condition because they can't do a thing about it other than witness themselves essentially dying over several days. But that's the idea, that this thing was created by the suffering and the horror, and then when it was unleashed by them, by the pain that they had, then it decided to stay there and then basically create havoc for anyone else that's there too. And then the very last thing that people believe that this elemental is actually the ghost of that same guy, that O'Carroll guy. As bad as he was, he ended up getting, I guess, his due revenge, because he ended up dying of leprosy, and he died right there in the castle. And the idea is that he loved or hated or whatever that castle so much that even after death he decided to stay with that castle as the elemental that we see today. And that's why people believe that it looks like decaying monster that's the size of a sheep of some sort, and it has that strong decomposing flesh scent, or that sulfurous smell, because in this guy O'Carroll, once he died, that's him altogether. So very fascinating stuff, the elemental of Leap Castle. Does anyone have any more information that they'd like to share? If so, please post those comments right below. And more particularly, if someone has actually visited this location and seen firsthand any experiences, or knows someone that visited them, then that would be very, very interesting to hear too. And again, if you're going to go visit it, if you're in Ireland and you wanted to take that happen chance and maybe see what you have to see, take it with a little caution, considering all the tales that are tied to this thing and the horror that it can do. So, alright everybody, thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.